And so we are picking up yesterday from where we left off yesterday with this shopping cart demonstration. I'm going to guesstimate we did, 2/3 of it yesterday. Have about another 1/3 to complete. And I'm in the right folder, the shopping cart folder, and I should be able to run dev and launch it on localhost. At which point, this is where we left it off yesterday. We can add and subtract quantities. This is a problem we'll want to fix. We can add new items, and if they go down to 0, we probably want to remove the item, so we'll fix that. Amongst refactoring this a little bit so that each one of these items is in its own component. So we have a list component and we have a item component that is a child of the list, which is pretty common. So there's a few tasks left to do. Glancing at some of the code that we wrote yesterday, notice when we're calling these events, one thing that we had to do, if you're calling this function, notice this function has one input, and you're basically calling a function with any number of inputs, then you have to have this arrow function. It's a requirement. So that's just one thing. Now, if you don't, let's just say I were to have another button, and this is not going to do anything. But I'm going to say button on click, and I just want to call a function that doesn't have any input parameters. You could do it like that. Okay, so it's the syntax for calling a function without inputs is pretty condensed and simple. But if you have to pass any number of inputs into the function, then you have to give it these parentheses, arrow, and then call the function. Now, notice this syntax here, which does not pass the event object. Notice on my name change here, I had to pass this event object. So the way that you pass that event object is just putting the object identifier, EVT, or sometimes you just call it E, in this first set of parentheses, and then you can pass that to your function on name change. Ultimately, on name change, we're using this event to read from the whatever the target is, the value out of that target, which in this case is our text box. Okay, so we needed to read some input off of a control on the user interface, and so we needed to pass the event object in to do that, right? So notice this function just passes in an item. This function passes in a control, be it the text box, and an item. Okay, so if I pull up the lab just to kind of go through our requirements, users can edit the name of an item, check. It must be kept in sync with an items array. And hoisting state to the cart list component. What that means is that your state, your hooks are in our cart list, and that's where our state is currently located. Hoisting means to send up to a parent component, just means raise it up. We had it there from the get-go. So we don't have to hoist anything because that's where we've always had it. Let's see, give the name field the class's cart item name and form control. If the name is blank, give the class is invalid. If the name is not blank, give the name field is valid. Okay, so this is on the item, and there's some requirements here around, hey, if the item is blank, we're going to throw some CSS on here. These are bootstrap classes, is invalid or is valid. So let's kind of look those classes up in Git Bootstrap, and this is invalid and is valid. And so you can kind of see here we get these little check marks if they're good, but if it's blank, you get a red outline with this little warning versus a check mark. So let's just kind of check this out and see how this works if I were to just throw these on my controls. Let me delete this dummy button. And this is on my text box. Class name of form control. And I'm just going to put the class name of is invalid. Now this is, not meeting the requirements of the lab, but I just want to see that the is invalid kind of throws some CSS on there. And so what we need to do per this lab, if the name is blank, we'll put the invalid attribute on, and if it's not blank, we throw the is valid attribute. So we haven't talked about conditionally rendering content. And so we can kind of conditionally add Bootstrap classes based on the item.name .length. Okay, so let me kind of show how to do this in a basic level. Inside of our curlies, we have these Boolean flags. We could say something like this: item dot, and this is not going to be the final code. Item.name .length greater than 0. And so if the item's name length is greater than 0, we're going to render an input control with the is valid. This is just one way of saying, okay, put this entire control here if the item's name.length is greater than 0. And so this is conditional rendering based on the condition that the length is greater than 0. We're going to add this is valid. And if I go back here, I should just keep it pulled up, 5173. Okay, so now, obviously, they're all valid. Okay, so now the control's gone, right? That's why we don't want to get rid of the whole control as we're currently doing. We just want to conditionally render a CSS class attribute. Okay, so back here. So here's what we're going to try. We're going to get rid of this. Okay, we're just going to bring the control back to what it was. And on the class name, let's put our conditional rendering they're always going to be form controls. Let's do this. And we'll say item dot name dot length greater than 0. And whoop. Here we'll do a ternary, right? So is the item name.length greater than 0? If it is, form control and the class that we had before, which was valid, is hyphen valid. Otherwise, form control and is invalid. So here's what we're trying. We're asking a question. Is the name's length greater than 0? If so, is valid. Otherwise, is invalid. And now, okay. So I think it's working partially. But I think what's happening is if I inspect, check this out, I think it's going to have both classes now. Okay.
No, I think you set it to the actual text, not the quantity.
Oh, I set it to the length of the name, not the quantity. You're right. It's based on the text. So if I go here, there it goes. I was setting it on the name length, which is correct, not the quantity. Okay, so now we're doing a little conditional rendering based on the length of the name. So it starts off with 0 length, we get that. Otherwise, we get that. All right, so we have met all the requirements on number 1. If the name is blank, is invalid. If the name is not blank, it is valid.
Are you able to use the joy validation in React?
I have not tried that. Joy is meant for back end. It's meant for server side. Now there are other front end library. I mean Bootstrap, for example. Bootstrap, for example, has its own front end validation that you can use. There's also a tool that I've been exposed to recently. Hold on. Since you asked, called Zod. In Zod, we have to first learn TypeScript, but once we learn TypeScript, we can use this Zod that is a validation library as well. So I think the kind of the progression there, if you don't want to use Bootstrap validation on the front end, which would be where we're at today, we could use this Zod front end validation once we learn a little TypeScript. TypeScript's not too hard to pick up. You understand JavaScript, you understand C#, merging the two, JavaScript with types is TypeScript. Okay. Okay, users can increase and decrease the quantity of an item. This must be kept in sync on click and states in cart list. Give a plus, give a minus. Do not allow the quantity to go above 10. Do not allow the quantity to go below 0. So we can have 10 and we can have down to 0. 1 second as we okay, so I've got a quantity add, and I'm going to add a line of code, const new quantity equals item quantity plus 1. And only, so again, if do not allow the quantity to go above 10. So only if new quantity, if new quantity is less than 10, we can increment our quantity. Something like that. Let's think about this. I'm not sure. Let's read the quantity. If new quantity is less than 10, we can increment our quantity. Something like that. Let's see if that works. I don't know how many times I'm going to close this. Apologies. So like 9. Okay, less than or equal to 10. If new quantity is less than or equal to 10, now we can get to 10. And on the other one, when we're removing, we do the same kind of deal. Const new quantity equals item quantity minus 1. If new quantity is what? So if it's greater than 0, if it's greater than 0, we can subtract. Greater than or equal to 0. Well, for some reason my logic is off by 1, but we got it to work. So we can go up to 10. And we can go down to 0. Cool. So do not allow the quantity to go above 10, check. Do not allow the quantity to go below 0, check. If the quantity is 10 or greater, disable the plus button. So the plus button is right here. So we could add in a little ternary in here based on what we kind of did here. If the item quantity, now here, you know, I already have these classes, and I don't want to repeat that. So I kind of want to think here, but class name, I don't love this, but we're gonna have to repeat this. I'm not sure that I can concatenate strings on my class name. So I got to think about how to do that. But let's go item quantity equals 10 question mark. If that's true, we do one thing, otherwise we do something else. And
Could you put the true and the false inside parentheses and then try adding it on to work?
let's copy these classes into both conditions, here and here. I don't like that that's repeated code, so that's kind of what I'm complaining about. But if the item quantity equals 10 is true, we need to, you know, I'm sure there's a bootstrap disabled, so let's go here and see that there is a class of add the disabled Boolean attribute. Oh, well, there you go. We don't need any bootstrap classes. Of course, there's just the disabled Boolean attribute. So my mistake here. So let's take this off of class name. Class name is this. My mistake. Okay. And we'll just do this. Item dot quantity equals 10. If that's true, we just add disabled. We don't even need a false block. Let's see, what are you not happy with here? Okay, maybe we say disabled equals, and then this becomes true, colon, false. If the item's quantity is 10, disabled becomes true, otherwise false. Lots of these ternary operators in React. You see, you got to get used to this quite a bit. And let's see what breaks over here. Refresh. Clearly my logic is backwards. If the item dot quantity equals 10, disabled is true. Well, you know, let's do it backwards. That doesn't seem to make sense. So disabled is, you know, I don't think it's Boolean. Like, my understanding is you just say disabled. You just got it working.
Yeah, it's just make it 1 instead of 10.
If item quantity is 1,
I don't need to put rent room false.
that's maybe what's good. That's a string true and a string false. That's my mistake.
Why would it be 1?
Why would it be 1 is the question. Okay, so 10. If the item quantity is 1, there we go. So my problem was a string true versus a string false. We just need true and false not in quotes.
Does it work if you...
And if you subtract, there she goes.
And then something similar for on subtraction.
Yeah, something similar for on subtract.
I guess that one would be 0.
Yeah. If the quantity is 0 or less, disable the button.
It should never be.
Greater than or equal to 10, just because that's what it says. And then on this one, you say, hey, disabled equals item dot quantity less than or equal to 0, question mark, true, colon, false. Voila, voila, voila. Although, who's the marketing genius that says you can only buy 10 of our hats? I mean, come on. You can buy as many hats as you want. We will sell you all of the hats.
Maybe I only have
You're
10
gonna
hats
pay
to sell.
dearly for them, but you're...
Add item. Starts off, no good. Thing. Bada bing, bada boom. Checking off requirements. Display the total number of items in the shopping cart. At the top of the page, badge, you can put the classes on it that are relevant. Hide the count when there are 0 items in the cart. Okay, again, this is all conditional rendering. So conditionally render the item count. So item count greater than 0. Now, to do this, let's see, display item count otherwise, maybe, and you could do this differently, add items to cart. if the item count is greater than 0, display the item count. Otherwise, say add items to cart. Or whether you just now, you could say item count or please add items to cart. Kind of makes no difference. So it's kind of doing the same thing. Couple syntaxes for if item count is truthy, display item count, but if it's falsy, display the paragraph. That's one way, kind of an if-else. But the other syntax for doing the same thing would be this ternary. It's an if-else, right? A couple ways of doing it. More requirements to go. Implement a button to add new items to the cart. When the add item button is clicked, adds a new item, adds an empty item. Implement a way to remove items from the cart. When the user decrements the quantity to 0, instead of decreasing the quantity to 0, remove the item from the list. So that kind of goes down here. If new quantity is greater than again, I want to say greater than 0. Instead of doing a postfix decrement here, I don't think this is going to matter, but I'm going to do a prefix. Nope. No, I'm not. Okay, so I was off by 1 on my decrement, and I think this is going to cause a problem. Because here, I say item quantity minus 1, and if it's greater than 0, so new quantity, so again, if you go from 1, and you subtract 1, that new quantity becomes 0. Is 0 greater than 0 is false. Maybe this doesn't break, because now what I need to do, I need an else block. Else remove the item from the array. And I want to use to filter. There is an array.filter that can get rid of elements. So ultimately here we'll be calling set items, and here's an items.filter, and if we kind of break this down, each item, does the item ID not equal the current item's ID, in which case you keep the item. Otherwise, you remove the item. And so filter, this filter will return a new array. That's why it works. You're not actually modifying the items array. Filter returns a new array, and you're setting the items to that new array. So let's check it out. Yeah, it does not exactly work. So this is supposed to actually drop, and I think it might be this off by 1 that I'm experiencing. I think this code's gonna work, but I think I am off by 1. Let me look at this just a second. Yeah, so a couple ways to fix it, but if our new quantity is greater than 0, then we subtract an item. Otherwise, we remove the item. So if I refresh this, there we go. You can see hat, as soon as hat goes to 0, hat's removed.
Doesn't that mean we no longer do the disabled feature in the button click?
What's the question?
Well, because it removes at 0.
Yeah, then you're not gonna see the disabled.
So,
Yeah.
so we no longer need that.
Yeah, it's no longer thing. We can increase to 10, and as soon as we decrease to 0, she's gone. Okay, implement a way to remove items from the cart. Yeah, sure. Well, what else do we got here? Remove items from the cart, show an error message when there are no items in the cart. Your cart is empty. Add some items to it. We've got that. Use CSS to improve the look and feel of the app. Okay. All right. So we met all the requirements. You can tinker with the look and feel all you want. All that's really left, and you know, for me, anytime I'm coding a project, you know, you kind of just get it working first, and then you can make more components out of it. Like I tend to just like get it all working and as minimal components as possible, and then you start bringing components out. So it is pretty normal. We're going to add another component anytime you have a list to have items in the list. And so I'm going to make another component called whatever, cart item. And then each one of these items will be mapped to cart item. And then we're going to deal with actually sending our state around. Now that it's a functioning application, we can kind of collapse this, collapse this, collapse this. We can collapse that, collapse our state. And now we're going to make, inside of our source, how about cart item.jsx? Now, Jacob made a point yesterday that is worth reiterating. Your components have to start with a capital letter, kind of one of those rules, one of those weird rules that as we're getting used to making components that exist, so you can't make that. And they also have to return some JSX. And so if they don't have a return here, this is kind of a bare bones. I'm sure I'm forgetting something, and I just like making my one function, you know, export default cart item. So let's just kind of make our component, make it bare bones. It's a capital letter and it's got a return statement. Of course, all of our JavaScript written here. And let's actually, sure, we'll just do console log. I like that, right? Because we have a cart list which has cart items in it. And what we're going to do is now we need to import that. We need to import our component into cart list. So once we kind of have this component at its bare bones, we need to go over to cart list, and up at the top of cart list, we're going to import cart item from cart item. And check this out. So inside of my map, I've got all this markup, right? I'm going to cut this markup, paste it inside of cart item, and I'm just going to comment that markup out for now. Okay? So I'm kind of saving my markup. But back in cart list, for each item, let's render a cart item. Now it's saying, hey, you're not doing anything with this item. Let's write this code here. Item equals item. And let's give this a key, very similar to what we explained yesterday. Every root element needs a key, and this will be item.id. So we're sending the item, what we're doing is we're sending the item into the cart item. And we're just calling it item. It's weird when we do this a lot. It's like item equals item. It's like, what's going on here? But this is passing the state down to the child. Okay, another very common thing in React is passing your state down. Okay, you cannot pass the state up. It turns out you can only pass it down. You can't pass it over to a sibling. You could only pass it down. Okay, so as we're learning React, we have these rules. And one of the rules is you can only pass state from a parent to one of its children. And so that's what we're doing here. We're taking an item, and now notice these functions aren't really being used, but that's okay. Let's see if we are in fact rendering the words 3 cart items, which is all we're doing. For each cart item, we're sending back a string of text that says cart item. Okay, so our cart, our component is working. Okay, now we got to get it back to its full working state, which we're about to do. Okay, let's resume here after a little break. Let's see, close these things that aren't relevant. Close. To kind of glance at this, this page, it might, if we open up the console, you might expect the cart list is rendered once. Then there's 3 cart items, so each item causes the cart item component to be rendered. Okay, so just kind of keeping an eye on these components and when they're being drawn to the screen, that's probably working how you'd expect. Now if I click add item, we added a 4th cart item. Again, this let's clear it out. Click add item. Again, it 1 and 1, 2, 3, 4. So it causes a re-rendering of all of the controls that we're dealing with right now. So again, if you kind of clear it out and add an item, you get 1 list and 1 console per item that's on the list. Okay. So what have we done? We've made a child component. Cart item is a child of cart list. And we sent down the entire item inside of our map. To receive that, okay? Very often, there's two approaches here. There's an object that by convention is called props, okay? And props is what you typically see here. And you can then, when you're working with this, you can say props dot, for example, I can do props dot item. That's this thing right here. This is a custom property called item. Props dot item dot, what is it? The name attribute. Says item is missing in props validation. Let's see if that code in fact works. And you could see we're able to extract the names of our items, which is cool, but adding the word props in front of this every time is not my preferred method. You can do a little bit of object destructuring then and just receive the item that is a child of props, and then you can just say item.name. And I'm kind of curious how to fix that one, that little red squiggly, but nonetheless, that's a little bit direct. We could just say item dot and not have to say props dot item. So we do a little destructuring here, and that's my preference. Okay, so to send objects down, you send them through what are called props, and you can destructure this object and just get access to the item. Now, if you called it my item or something like that, this is the name of the property. You'd have to call it my item over here, and then my item here, and just refactor that. It all still works, but I'm not going to call it my item. I'm just going to call it, I'm just going to say item equals item. Bless you. And then I can receive item over here, and then I can access item.name. Okay, instead of returning my paragraph though, let's bring in my row. And there should be one parent here. So again, our JSX has to have a parent. And now that we've extracted item, this is all good. Okay, item is missing in props validation. Let me just maybe that's a battle for another time. Well, now, out of the box, we got that working. Now, none of our adding and subtracting is not working, and changing the name is not working. Why? Well, our functions to do so are still over here, right? So our controls are now rendered down here, and our events are over here. And, this child doesn't know what that event is. So in addition to sending the whole item down, we also have to send our functions down, okay? And those functions will be received by props, just like the item was received by props. So the way to do this is, again, through props. And here's what it looks like. So again, our custom property will be called onNameChange equals curlies. Here's our function EVT arrow onNameChange EVT and Now in this case, we're already sending item down once, so now it seems weird to me, but that's okay. We'll send item down twice. Now I can kind of do this here. So that's how we're going to send on name change down. Let's send down on add quantity. And in this case, we don't need to send, we could do that. And on subtract quantity, I might be able to get it down so we don't have to send item down twice, but we're sending the entire item down, and now we're sending these functions down on name change, on add quantity. So again, to receive them, to send them down, you create the property name here, create the property name here, create the property name here, and then when you call that prop on the other side, we pass down this function that performs the on name change. So this is basically sending it down. To receive it then, we need to receive, comma, on name change, on add quantity, on subtract quantity. So this receives those functions. And then the question becomes, do I need to update any of my code from here? Nope. So we can verify that adding and subtracting works, changing the name works, adding an item works, down to 0, and there we have it. Sir.